Okay guys, we'll go ahead and get started. In order to do your homework, realize we need to start talking about Bootstrap. And so, quite honestly, we're moving pretty fast through this class. The fact that we're already here and talking about this tool, we've covered a lot of basics, a lot of fundamentals, and it's just moving fast. And so I think, based on what I see, you guys are keeping up, and I've got a lot of work to grade from last week, but as far as I can tell, I think we're ready for this. And if you pull up your repo, there is a folder called Bootstrap, and inside of it there are slides, and there's probably the first two PowerPoints are the most beneficial, which are Introduction to Bootstrap and then the grid system. And so now that's not to shortchange these other PowerPoints, but getting into this introduction is going to lay a lot of foundations that you'll be able to use to understand Bootstrap. And if you can get kind of given a couple of tools, I think you can go pretty far with Bootstrap. And so what is Bootstrap? Well, if you take a snippet of their site, you could tell the marketing behind what is Bootstrap. So quickly design and customize responsive mobile-first sites. So as we've learned what mobile-first approach is and kind of the benefits of mobile-first, we know that that's the first thing about Bootstrap. It is a mobile-first solution. Using the world's most popular front-end open-source toolkit featuring Sass variables and mixins, responsive grid system, so we will talk about the responsive grid system, pre-built components, and powerful JavaScript plugins. So go ahead and check out this website, getbootstrap.com. It is not, this is our homepage, getbootstrap.com. Here you can right off the top see the version of Bootstrap, version 5, which is makes this slide a little bit dated. So I will be using the latest version of Bootstrap, okay, which is version 5. For this versioning system, it says version 5.20 is in beta. And so it's important to understand the different versions. Here's 5.1. And so let's go ahead and use 5.1 instead of using some beta version of Bootstrap, which always runs the risk of changing the feature set that is available in beta. Something a little bit more stable would be version 5.1. So right off the top of the bat, this is the website that we're going to use. This is a toolkit for developing entire websites in a responsive manner, mobile first. And as you saw in their marketing plugin, the world's most popular, just to talk to its popularity. The other day I looked this up. Let me pull it up in Discord. A pretty interesting website is chromestatus.com, metrics CSS popularity. actually I don't know if this will tell us what percentage of sites use Bootstrap. I thought there might be a property I can point at here. And there might be. I'll come back to that. So get started using Bootstrap. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a stable version 5.13. And you notice when I change that, it takes me to the Getting Started page. And so to get started using Bootstrap, you know, when I write code, typically I kind of start here, and I start with this old Emmet hotkey for the Emmet abbreviation. And this is really good. It includes the right meta tags for mobile responsiveness, everything to make a valid HTML template. But you're going to see here, to use Bootstrap, there's some CSS that we need to link to. And so here you can kind of see there is a link tag to link to a Bootstrap CSS. And just to take a look at this is a minified CSS file. So if I copy and paste that URL, I don't know if you've ever taken a look at a minified CSS file. But this is a whole bunch of pre-written CSS that is not formatted for human eyes, right? So this is a bunch of selectors that have been pre-written in Bootstrap. This is just a bunch of pre-written CSS, and then they minimize it, meaning they get rid of all the white space so that it creates the smallest file size possible for you to download. Okay, so this, it's also important when you look at the version of CSS, you can quickly tell what version of Bootstrap that you're working with. Bootstrap has been around for quite a while now. You can see the copyright goes back to 2011. So I've been teaching Bootstrap, you know, at Rankin for a long time, and I've gone through a lot of different versions, a lot of different changes. And so when you're working with Bootstrap, it's important to understand what version of Bootstrap you're working with, and you can tell that by looking at the CSS file and seeing what version right at the top. Okay, so if you're not working with version 5, you might be working version 4. You might be working with version 3. You click on all versions and see all those various versions that are out there. Each version has its own documentation and is going to do things slightly differently, right? So they're not always completely backwards compatible. In fact, you know, switching between versions, oftentimes a lot needs to be rewritten, you know, if you're going to upgrade versions. So keep that in mind, that what version of Bootstrap are you working with. If you're, for example, going to work on a site that it was written 2 or 3 years ago and that site was using Bootstrap, it's probably using an older version, and you need to go to that version's documentation to work with that version of Bootstrap. Okay, so kind of coming back here, this is 5.1, and you see that there's some CSS that is pre-written CSS. There's also pre-written JavaScript. And so to link to a CSS file, here's our link tag. To link to our JavaScript, here's a script tag. And this is going to give us a lot of that interactivity that JavaScript is known for. By the way, this integrity is going to help the browser make sure that, you know, the file's not tampered with before it gets downloaded. And cross-origin anonymous lets it come across the internet, all this kind of stuff. So this is the link tag that you need. This is the script tag that you need. If you scroll down a little bit more, you see the starter template. And so this is what I'm going to use, this starter template, in place of the Emmet abbreviation. I'm just going to kind of come in here and paste this. And this is going to be my starting point. Whoops. Excuse me. Voice is getting sore. I've been talking for 3 hours straight. Right off the bat, when I'm working with Bootstrap, I notice that this font, this H1, is not the default font that we typically get in a in other words, some CSS has been applied. You also notice kind of down here there's a bunch of variables that we can use for colors. We'll talk about that. But here in my font family tag, it's set to use a variable, which is this font family variable, which if you can kind of hover, you can see what font it actually is. It says, and I can't, Segoui, Roboto would be the next one, Helvetica New, I guess you would pronounce that, then Arial. So it's going to kind of load those fonts in that order. And so the point that I want to make here is that that's when I see this kind of different looking font, then I know that things are linked up properly. But it's pretty safe if you use the starter template to know that you're linking correctly to your Bootstrap CSS, okay, and to your JavaScript. Now you're going to notice that the script tag is down here in the body, kind of at the bottom of the body, okay. And when we get to JavaScript, we'll learn of the various ways that you can link to a script tag and some of the different advantages that those provide. Okay. It says down here, it says optional JavaScript, choose one of the two. And so here is option 1. It says Bootstrap bundle with popper, and we'll explore what this popper is. And so this would be all together in one place. Option 2, separate popper and Bootstrap. So if you know, for example, you weren't using popper, then you would come into here, you would uncomment this out, you would comment this out, and we could take out popper just like so, and now we're not using this feature, so we can just use this script tag instead. Okay, but it's pretty safe, you know, for what we're, at least when we're starting, to go ahead and use option 1. But if you learn what popper is and you know you're not using it, you could, in theory, keep it out that way. So that's getting started using Bootstrap. We know what Bootstrap is. It's a toolkit to develop mobile responsive websites first. It's a very popular toolkit. Back to the slideshow. So, you know, Bootstrap goes back a decade. Was actually created at Twitter. So I remember in the early days they called it Twitter Bootstrap, but now it's just referred to as Bootstrap. It is a popular front-end framework. You know, has versions 2, 3, 4, and now 5, and it's made it much easier to build responsive websites. Benefits of Bootstrap: it's quick to get started. I demonstrated, you know, building a website, you know, as easy as starting with that starter template, and then you start writing HTML in a way that uses the various components. It is a mobile-first responsive design. Again, the benefits there are that typically mobile apps are hardest to figure out what content and the layout of mobile apps is harder than a desktop first approach. So strategically, mobile first is kind of the industry practice because it's the harder a way to develop mobile first versus desktop down. This is considered mobile up. And there are themes, and so we'll get into this. How can you theme your Bootstrap site by changing out the CSS, and just by changing a theme, kind of like to say a dark theme or a light theme. You know, there are a whole bunch of themes that you can just swap out some defaults for your site. Now, when you use the starter template, we are linking to what's called a CDN, and CDN, I believe, stands for Content Delivery Network. Basically, it is a version of a CSS file that is downloadable online. In other words, you don't have a local copy on your machine. Okay, instead you instruct the client, you know, whatever client is accessing your website, to go to this URL and download the CSS. So you could think of it as hosted CSS. Instead of your web server hosting it, it's someone else's web server hosting it. So that's what a CDN is good for. Most of the time you're fine using a CDN. There are some cases where if this URL were to go down, right, you might want to provide a backup copy from your web server. Okay, so like many computers, you know, that they tend to break and web servers can go down, and so a CDN is not a guaranteed thing. And so you might consider creating a backup with a local copy. So CDNs have their advantages, but they can also have their shortfalls. But in this class, for the most part, you want to use a CDN, you're going to be just fine. So I went ahead and showed, you know, basically there's two really important things that you want to include is the CDN for the CSS file and the CDN for the JavaScript. Now again, you'll notice here, yeah, this is a bit old. I might want to go ahead and get you guys, there are some updated slides. jQuery used to be a third script tag that was included with Bootstrap, and you'll notice there is no current link to jQuery. I believe they took that out in version 5. Yes. So jQuery is no longer included. Let me pause the recording here real quick and see if I have some updated slides. Okay, I went ahead and put the updated slides in Discord for you to pull down. I'll go ahead and open those.
I think we're in slide 5. That's where you left off.
Yep. So you guys can pull that down. We left off on slide 5. Now, you know, I did use the CDN, but just to demonstrate how to use a local copy as well. Let's go back to getbootstrap.com. And now that I'm on version 5, and this is 5.1, on the home page, We're going to click Read the Installation Docs. And here's the option to download a local copy. So now let's go ahead and click on Download. And this is a zip folder. Again, this is if you don't use the CDN. You can go about it this way. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it in my docs, GitHub. And this is chapter 11. Oh, by the way, I'm on 5.2. Let me change it back to 5.1. Now I'll download 5.1. So you can see right in the file name 5.2 beta. So that's not what I wanted. So now when you click on Extract All, there is it's still going to put a subfolder in my Chapter 11 homework. And I'm going to open this with code. And you can see now I've got local copies of my JavaScript files and my CSS files. So here's my Bootstrap min CSS. So if I were to go here, index.html, now I'd use Emmet. Let's go ahead and link to CSS Bootstrap min.css. So let's find, there's my Bootstrap min CSS. So now I've linked to Bootstrap. And down here in the body, I'm going to put a script tag. And bootstrap.min.js. So again, I'm linking to the CSS file, I'm linking to the Bootstrap file. If I launch my hello world, there you can see again, I could tell just by looking at the font, the Bootstrap CSS is linked up properly. Two different ways of doing the same thing. Not super important which method you use, but just so that you can see both ways. You can theme Bootstrap, which is to say that you would download a different style sheet and just get a different look for your nav bar and your buttons. And one theming site is called bootswatch.com. In Bootstrap, they use a technology called Reboot, which is basically a normalize. If you remember, normalize.css helps us get cross-browser compatibility for like a starting template. And so you can see here, you no longer need like a normalized CSS. With Bootstrap, it's already built in. Okay, so we went over how to install Bootstrap using both a local copy and a CDN. So let's talk about breakpoints. And so this is an important concept when it comes to Bootstrap and the different, like we did manually with media queries, Bootstrap has some built-in breakpoints, and I want to look at the docs. Now let's go again to the Bootstrap docs, and under layout you see breakpoints. And so you're going to see these breakpoints in a lot of places in Bootstrap. And so you've got text values, which is extra small, small. So extra small, you can see the dimensions are less than 567. Small is for 576, and to basically less than this medium, which is 768. So again, you start with the smallest devices, and then greater than, just like we did with the media queries, greater than 567 are for small, greater than 768 would be medium devices. What's considered large is 992, extra large is 1200, and extra large is 1400. And so we'll see how these abbreviations come into play at these different breakpoints when we get to, and again, we'll be using these abbreviations, specifically the grid system. And so we'll be using these abbreviations in the near future. And you can see here it says it can be changed by Sass, and this is just a spreadsheet with variables. And so basically in this spreadsheet you can change what a small device is by changing the variable. So what I haven't really said yet is that Bootstrap uses classes for most everything that it does. And so to give something margin, like a paragraph, if you want to add maybe units of margin on the outside or padding on the inside of a paragraph, you can add a class of p-3. And 3 is not like 3 pixels, or it's considered 3 units. And let me just demonstrate how by adding a padding class to a paragraph, we can add padding to our to a paragraph, right? So let's kind of come into here. And this is on an H1 hello world. If I take a look at it and inspect, let me get out of the mobile view. Right now this H1 has a little bit of margin on the bottom. The green is the padding. You can see there's really no padding on this H1. So let's add some padding to our H1. And again, these are the classes that you can add. So let's just add p-3. So by adding a class of p-3, let's go ahead and save that and open it back up in the browser. And already you can see our H1 has moved. And if I inspect, now I can see there's padding on all 4 sides of our H1. And here you can see it's actually 16 pixels of padding, which let's see, 3 into 16 is not even, so it's not like an even number that goes into the unit of measurement. Let's just do p-1. And that's 4 pixels. p-2. And so you could see where the class of p2 is adding the padding right here in our CSS. And so that calculates into 8 pixels of padding on all 3 sides. Again, we already did the P3. P4. And again, these are the default just for padding on all 4 sides. You can see the actual calculation is a 1.5 root ems. So the padding is 1.5 root r, or it was pronounced rems, right? So it's a 1.5 calculation. Why it's not an even number going up. 24. And let's add a little bit of margin. So P4 space m-1. So now if I inspect it, you can see the margin that's being applied to the heading. And you can see this is 0.25 rems of margin. Again, both margin and padding is just space. You just got to understand, is it inside the box, outside the box, etc. So these increments, now the margin is 0.5 root ems. By the way, this slide, right, is under Utilities Spacing. So if we go back to the docs and we click on, under Layout, we click on Utilities. And here you can see spacing utilities, so margin and padding, spacing utilities, and you can read, the full documentation on margin and padding. We haven't quite talked about different amounts of margin and padding depending on the screen size, okay, which we will. Next slide. What about an individual side of margin and padding? So M3 is on all sides, and then they get into margin on the top, margin on the bottom, margin on the left, so you can think of that as margin start. You could think of margin on the right as margin end, so MS, ME. Margin on the left and the right is MX, so on the x-axis, margin on the top and bottom is MY. Again, you can find all of these examples in the documentation. So MT, NB, MS, ME, MX, MY. There it all is right there. So, when you go into the HTML, by adding classes, for example, MT3, margin top 3, to our hello world heading, and then using the inspect tool. Now keep in mind, it already had some margin on the bottom, but there's our MT3, which is 1 rem, is the CSS that's written. And then they show horizontal centering. Now, luckily, Flexbox has a couple of different things built in for positioning and laying out. We're going to talk about the grid system. Probably when we come back from lunch, we'll get into the grid system. You'll find out that Flexbox, besides this thing called the grid system, that Bootstrap also uses Flexbox. And so in the documentation, we'll go through how, using these classes, we can Because why do I bring this up? Well, horizontal centering and vertical centering is very easy using Flexbox, right? Align content center, justify content center. But horizontal centering can be done pretty easily. Going back here, that's actually the next example. It says, additionally, Bootstrap includes MX Auto class for horizontally centering fixed width block level content. So number one, your block elements have to have a width, and then you can horizontally center it. So let's do that. So our H1, we can style our H1 of 50%, and then add a class of MX Auto. So those are the two things. Number one, your block level element has to have a width, and then by adding the class of MX-Auto, so that's margin on the X hyphen auto, we should be able to center our content. Now that doesn't look exactly centered on the page. Why is that? Well, it's because our width, if you look at the blue, that's the content width. And so it is centered from that perspective, when the entire element is centered. If it actually had more content, I think you would see it a little bit easier. Right, you see the centering a little bit easier that way. So that's a little bit different than like text align center, right? It's kind of doing almost like a wrapper where it's evening the space in between the left and the right on the margin. Okay, so now, I mean, a little bit earlier, back here when we talked about breakpoints, we talked about these device sizes. We gave the text value of small, the abbreviation of SM, and we said, small is basically from 576 and up to the medium size. So extra small is from 0 to 575, 576 to 768, so on and so forth, right? So what if we want to apply, so it's mobile first, so 0 margin for extra small, because there's no abbreviation here, right? So extra small, 0 margin, and then when you hit a medium size, so from extra small up to medium, there's no margin. But as soon as you hit medium, you get 2 units of margin, and then at large you get 3 units, and then at extra large you get 5 units. So this is a way of saying, okay, again, right here, it actually spells it out. No margin, because it's mobile first, right? So we're starting at the smallest. So M0 says no margin on extra small and small. As soon as we hit medium, we get 0.5 rems. As soon as we hit large, we get 1 rem, and then extra large, we get 3 rems. Right, so let's demo this, adding these classes to our heading. Bring my content back down. And I'll use my So no margin. No margin here until we hit a medium. Now you can see a little bit of margin on our medium, which again, where was the medium breakpoint? 768. So if I go back to that 768 right there. So 765, 66, 67, and there you can see that that text moves off of the screen a little bit. So that the CSS class of MD-2 applies. Our next breakpoint would be on large, which is 992. So 991, as soon as I hit up one more time, a different amount of margin applies. And that's on the M-large 3. So this is quite common in Bootstrap to not only apply different CSS classes, but apply them at different breakpoints. And again, it's just important to remember mobile first. Yep.
So you don't have to code the media breakpoints, you can just do it all in line.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually don't have to code the media queries. Now that's not to say that you won't code any media queries at all. You might still need to, modify, but a lot of that is handled, in line with these CSS classes. Okay, guys. There's a lot of coding examples, and I do like to code my demonstrations. However, it's been an entire morning of lecture, and this lecture would span quite a bit longer if I coded everything in here. So maybe if I just code a little less, and if you get the swing of what I'm doing here and how this works, for example, the class of W-75 applies the CSS of the width property at 75%. So width 75. Now, how does this work? Is it's 75% of the parent. So you'll notice that the blue box, the content, is now 75% of the parent. And so it's not centering or anything like that, but you could see that W75, and over here you could see the width of 75% has been applied. Now, if you uncheck that, you can see that the content goes 100% of the parent. Right, so I really think just kind of getting the general understanding, if you recall the difference, of max width and max height, right? So there's W, and then there's MW, which is max width of 100%, which means obviously it could go smaller, but nothing larger than 100% of the parent. So MW and MH would apply these CSS rules. We also did viewport width and viewport height. And so minimum viewport width would be min width of 100 VW. So we've done a fair amount of 100 VW, 100 VH. So min VH 100, min VW 100 would be the classes to, and again, we're, as far as the references, where it's at in the Bootstrap doc, it's always important to understand how to navigate the Bootstrap docs, utilities So if I go to utilities and sizing, this is where you could see where we're pulling our information from. Now colors. Now keep in mind we did talk about theming, and by changing out the actual style sheet here, by changing out this Bootstrap CSS to a different Bootstrap CSS, all these text values, in other words, what is considered the primary color, can change. By default, the class of text hyphen primary gives you kind of this color of blue. So let's come into here, text hyphen primary, get you CSS color of blue. And so you're going to see there's text values, text secondary, success, danger, warning, info, light, dark, muted, and white. So by changing the CSS text, it's basically text colors, that's how we're going to, change text color. And again, utilities color, or where they're at in the docs. So if that ever were to change in a future version, you go to the text colors, so text, or utilities colors, excuse me, utility colors. Background color. So if I apply a BG hyphen dark, we can get some background colors going on. And again, theming changes this. BG hyphen dark. Gets a background color. So that's under utilities background. Sorry, closing tabs, closing tabs. We get back to getbootstrap.com. Version 5.1, docs, utilities.
Your background, right?
Correct. Background. There we go. It's kind of interesting. BG primary with the class of BG gradient. That's neat. BG primary, BG gradient. BG primary, BG gradient. There we go. Then we can add borders. So the more you work with Bootstrap, the more you get used to adding a bunch of classes to something, right? So this is pretty normal. So to add a border, first we say border, and that kind of turns the border on, if you will, and then we'll say border hyphen danger. Could you write your own border? Sure, right? You could select your H1 and apply your own border, just as we've done in the past. But there's a way to do that built into Bootstrap. And so, why reinvent the wheel, so to speak? So some quick classes for styling text, right? So there's text align. So there's text center. So let's apply the class of text center. Right? Text align center. Text align right with the text end. And then of course we could do all of this at different breakpoints. And so, you know, dot text hyphen MD for medium hyphen start, you know. So it would be left align at medium and then maybe aligning on the right at some different breakpoint. These are a little less utilized, but you might have seen these where you could uppercase every word, right? So there's text transform property. I believe, do you guys remember text transform? I believe we covered text transform.
I think we did.
I think we covered it once. You remember it?
Yeah, I think we hit it. We didn't go linger on it for too long.
But we hit it. Yeah. To make things bold, right? So there's different values for font weight, right? So there's bold and bolder. There's font weight normal, font weight light, lighter, font style italic, font style normal. So to make things italic, FST italic. Let's go ahead and throw in the italic class to make our text italic. You get the hang of it. Okay, I did mention that Bootstrap can utilize Flexbox. So the fact that we just spent an entire week learning Flexbox is beneficial because we should be somewhat familiar. So by kind of merging the two, what have we learned about Bootstrap? A whole lot is done in classes with Bootstrap. Just by adding classes to our elements. And so let's take a look at how to do Flexbox in Bootstrap. So the class of dflex is going to be our starting point, but of course we need some markup here. So let's go ahead and get a parent div with 3 section children. Okay. And we'll add the class of d-flex. So this div will now be a flex container, right? And therefore you get the 3 children in the column format. And so dflex applies the CSS of display flex. Again, with the D changing for the display property, you can apply breakpoints. And so here, here's an interesting case where on, again, D none would be for extra small, small, and medium. So you're going up starting with, so in these 3 cases, you know, whatever the element is wouldn't even be displayed, and then on large and up it would be displayed. So just applying these classes, let's just apply, I don't know, on the second. Okay, so this section will not be displayed on small or extra small, smaller, medium, but as soon as it hits large, it will be displayed. So let's scale it down. See that? So it literally disappears until you hit a certain breakpoint, and all of a sudden becomes visible. So understanding these breakpoints and their text abbreviations becomes really useful here. But that kind of breaks us out of our discussion around Flexbox. Is just a bring that back. There we go. Here's another scenario where as soon as a device, so on extra small and small, the parent would be display block, but as soon as they hit the medium device, it's display flex. So a parent could display block until it hits a medium size, and then it hits display flex. So let's look at this, and let's apply this on the parent. So here, the parent is displaying block. Well, what does that mean? That means all these are not flex items, right? This is not a flex box here. In other words, they're just kind of a column format, which is what you want on smaller devices. But as soon as you hit that medium breakpoint, it's display flex, and now they go into a row format. And these are flex items. So they're not flex items here. There is no flex box here. But as soon as you hit here, there is a flex box. So I could see that being very useful. So this is, again, changing the parent's display property to be a flex box for certain devices and not for others. By default, the flex direction is row, but we can change that, right? So if we say flex column, we could tell our parent to flex in a column format by applying the class of flex column reverse. All these things that you can do in Flexbox, they basically have classes in Bootstrap. You could say, okay, flex in a column until you hit large, and then flex in a row. So if I put this on the parent, again, we're telling this parent to display flex in a column format until a large device, and then flex in a row. It's going to be kind of a similar format as before. As soon as you hit that large device, it goes from a column to a row. It's kind of the similar output as before. By the way, this is under Utilities Flex. So let's pull up Utilities. Everything that we've looked at really so far has been under Utilities. So here's Utilities Flex. And this is where you're going to get all of these classes. Maybe we want to center, right? So let's justify content center. And that's going to be on the parent. Whoop. And because they're kind of all these sections, let's change the width of the section and you would see this better. So let's style our section tags to be of something like that. Now that there's some actual space, they don't take up the whole width, you could see the justify content center working. Otherwise, they were flexing at the start. Just for all the justify content properties, of course, there's classes for align items as well. You can target a child and align that individual child differently than the other children. So there's align self. There's classes for flex grow and for flex shrink. Of course, order. Remembering the importance of wrapping. So you can apply the class of flex wrap. And so let's apply flex wrap to our parent. And then let's make these sections, you know, wider. Let's say each section is 50%, and then we should get a wrapping going on, which we do have the wrapping going on now. So 2 rows. So I hope that, you know, you're kind of getting the takeaway where to look at in the documentation for these different classes, and basically everything that you can do with Flexbox, you can do with Flexbox in Bootstrap. A lot of the things you could do with text, you can do with classes in Bootstrap. A lot of the background colors, you know, the borders, all the stuff that you can do with CSS, a lot of it's built into Bootstrap. And so just by learning the classes and how to apply the classes, you can do all these different things with Bootstrap. All right, guys, that is the end of the first lecture. Any questions on this before we take a lunch?
Yeah, so with the classes, so it's going to be pretty common to see classes that have, like, you know, 6, 7, 8 different things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's common to see an element with a bunch of different classes, you know, text colors and background colors and positioning and margin and all these different things. I'll tell you the big takeaway on this one is these different breakpoints, and just getting used to Bootstrap. Yep.
Can you also still use external CSS sheets?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So here's a Bootstrap CSS. If we want to write our own CSS, we can link to our own external CSS. You know, call it my styles or styles.css. And here, if I want to move this section tag into styles.css and link to styles.css, still works. So yeah, the Bootstrap CSS plays nice with their own custom CSS. Good question. Okay, guys, let's take a lunch.